Nora Vale had never been the kind of person who broke rules. She was the kind of person who wrote them down, underlined them twice, and followed them without question, clipboard in hand, badge clipped to her shirt, hair pulled back tight enough to give her a headache by noon. And that was every single day inside Harlow Correctional Facility, where she worked as a rehabilitation counselor, helping inmates reintegrate into society through education and therapy programs. She believed in the work. She had to, because if she didn't believe people could change, then nothing she did inside that building meant anything at all. Most of the women inside Harlow were there for things Nora understood, at least on paper: theft, fraud, drug charges, desperation wearing different faces. And she always read their files before she met them, always knew their histories before she knew their voices, because that was protocol. And protocol was the thing she held onto when everything else felt uncertain. In May 2247, Mara Voss, 29 years old, convicted of first-degree murder, 7 years into a 15-year sentence. And Nora read that file 3 times before their first session, sitting at her desk with the light going flat outside her window, reading the same paragraphs over and over and not quite understanding why she couldn't put it down. She had worked with difficult cases before. Women who shut down the moment she walked in. Women who laughed at her, women who threw things, and she had learned not to flinch, not to take it personally, not to bring it home with her at night, because she was professional, composed, and she thought she was prepared. She was not prepared for Mara Voss. The woman sitting across from her in the small counseling room was quiet in a way that felt intentional, not the silence of someone who had nothing to say, but the silence of someone who had decided, long ago, that speaking was a risk not worth taking. And she sat with her spine straight, hands resting flat on the table, eyes fixed somewhere just past Nora's shoulder, dark hair, sharp jaw, a scar along her left collarbone that disappeared under her collar. Nora opened her notebook and asked the standard intake questions: name, preferred name, comfort level, goals for the program, and Mara answered in short sentences, flat and precise, like she was reciting facts rather than talking about herself. Until Nora asked the question she always asked at the end of the first session: what do you want your life to look like when you leave here? Mara looked at her for the first time, really looked like she was measuring something, and then she said, I don't think about leaving. Why not? Because wanting things you can't have is a waste of energy. Nora wrote that down not because it was remarkable, but because she wanted to remember it, and she didn't fully understand why. The sessions were weekly, and Nora told herself that Mara was just another case. A complex one, yes. A difficult one, but still just a case, and she told herself that every Tuesday for 6 weeks. Until the 7th week came, and she stopped telling herself anything at all. Mara had started talking, not about the crime, not about her past, but about small things. The book she was reading. The way the afternoon light came through the window and hit the wall at exactly the right angle. The fact that she had memorized the schedule of every guard on the East Wing and could predict, within 2 minutes when the shift changed, what happened. That last one made Nora pause, and she asked, you pay that much attention to your surroundings? I pay attention to everything, Mara said. It's the only thing that keeps you safe in here. Nora looked at her for a long moment and asked, does it ever get exhausting, always being on guard? Mara tilted her head slightly like the question surprised her, and then she said, yes, it does, and it was the most honest thing she had said in 7 weeks. The change happened gradually, the way most things do. And Mara started arriving at sessions before Nora did, started sitting differently, less rigid, elbows on the table, chin resting on her hand. And she started asking questions instead of just answering them. What made you want to do this job? Nora considered lying. Considered giving the professional answer about wanting to contribute to rehabilitation and social reform, but instead she said, I had a friend who went to prison when we were 19, she came out a different person, and I wanted to understand why. Mara was quiet for a moment before she asked, did you? Not completely, Nora admitted, but I'm still trying. Something shifted in Mara's expression, not quite a smile, but something softer and more careful than anything she'd shown before, and she said, that's either very dedicated or very stubborn. Probably both, Nora said, and that time, Mara almost smiled almost. Nora drove home that night with her hands tight on the steering wheel, and the feeling that she had made some kind of mistake she couldn't identify yet. Something small and irreversible. Like a crack in glass you only notice after it's already spread. She requested Mara's full file from the records department, not just the intake summary but everything, trial transcripts, witness statements, police reports. And she told herself, it was professional curiosity, due diligence, wanting to understand her client better. And she read it over tonight at her kitchen table with cold coffee and a growing unease she couldn't shake. The case against Mara Voss had been built around one central piece of evidence, a security footage still, grainy and time-stamped, that placed her near the victim's apartment building 30 minutes before the estimated time of death, and the victim was a man named Derek Hale, 34 years old, Mara's former employer, and there were no fingerprints at the scene, no DNA, no weapon ever recovered. And the prosecution's case had relied almost entirely on that footage and the testimony of a single witness, a woman named Clara Sims, who claimed she had seen Mara arguing with Derek in the parking lot the week before his death. The defense had been underfunded. Mara's attorney had filed two motions that were denied and hadn't called a single expert witness. And Nora sat with that for a long time, thinking about Mara's hands always flat on the table, the stillness of her, the way she watched everything without seeming to react, the way she had said, "I don't think about leaving," like someone who had stopped hoping, not someone who had stopped caring. She closed the file and didn't sleep. She knew she shouldn't bring it up. She knew there were rules about maintaining professional distance, about not getting personally involved in an inmate's legal situation. And if she had questions about a case, she was supposed to refer them to the appropriate department and move on, but she brought it up anyway. She waited until the end of a session when the room felt quieter than usual, and then she said, "I read your trial transcripts." Mara went very still. All of them, Nora added, the witness testimony, the evidence logs, everything. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled tight, and then Mara said, "Why?" And it wasn't a question. It was more like she was bracing for something because something didn't feel right, Nora said. "And I needed to understand why." Mara looked at her for a long moment. Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did. Something careful and guarded giving way to something else, just for a second, and then she said, "You shouldn't do that. It's not safe." Nora frowned and asked, "What do you mean?" Mara leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping. And she said, "The man who died, he wasn't who people thought he was. And the people who wanted him dead, they're not in here. They're out there, and they already made sure I couldn't say anything." Nora felt the cold move through her slowly and asked, "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you should stop asking questions," Mara said. "And I'm saying that because..." She paused, her jaw tightening. "I don't want anything to happen to you." Nora did not stop asking questions. She was careful about it, using personal time, filing nothing under her work login, going back through public records and news archives, anything she could find about Derek Hale that existed outside the trial documents, and what she found took her 3 weeks to piece together and made her sit in her car in the facility parking lot for 20 minutes without moving. Derek Hale had not been just a businessman. He had been the front man for a financial fraud operation that had moved millions of dollars through shell companies, connected to at least to city officials, and the investigation had been dropped 18 months before his death due to what was cited as insufficient evidence. And one of the detectives who had worked that investigation had retired 6 months after Derek died, while the other had received a significant promotion. Clara Sims, the witness who had testified against Mara, had a brother with a record, 3 charges, all dropped in the 18 months between Derek Hale's death and Mara's trial. And Nora sat with all of that and felt something cold and certain settle in her chest. Because Mara hadn't killed Derek Hale, Mara had known too much about who had. She had to be careful about how she told her, because the session rooms had cameras and everything was logged. And she waited until a day when the camera in room 4 was marked for maintenance, a fact she had noticed 3 weeks earlier and filed away without knowing why. And she sat down across from Mara and said quietly, "I found the connection between Clara Sims's brother and the fraud case." Mara's expression didn't change, but her breathing shifted. "You need to stop," Mara said. "I also found the detective's financial records from a public disclosure database," Nora continued. "And the promotion he received included a housing allowance that tripled his previous salary." Mara closed her eyes for a second and said, "You're not listening to me," her voice low and tight. "Nora, if they find out you've been looking into this..." "I know," Nora said. "You don't know," Mara said. "You have no idea what these people are capable of." "Then tell me," Nora said, "because you've been protecting me from information I need to have. And I would rather know the truth than stay safe inside an ignorance that has kept you in here for 7 years. The room was so quiet she could hear the ventilation system humming overhead. And Mara looked at her, really looked, the same way she had in that very first session, measuring, weighing. And then she said, "I saw something. The night Derek died, I was there because he had called me. Said he needed to meet, that he had made a mistake, that he wanted to get out. And I went because I thought he was finally going to tell the truth about what he'd done, and what they'd made him do. But when I got there he was already dead and there was someone leaving, and I saw her face. And I knew who she was. She worked for one of the city officials connected to the fraud. And she saw me too. Nora's hands were completely still on the table. 3 days later, Mara continued. Clara Sims came forward as a witness, and I understood. They weren't just framing me to close the case. They were sending me a message: stay quiet. Don't say who you saw, or what happens to you in here is the least of your problems. Who did you see? Nora asked. Mara shook her head once and said, if I tell you that, you become a target. I'm already looking into the case. Nora said, if they're watching, I'm already on their radar. I know, Mara said quietly. Then tell me. Her name is Sylvia Crane, Mara said. She's a deputy to Councilman Reyes. She's been in that office for 11 years, and she is very good at making problems disappear. Nora went home that night and sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about what it meant to know something you couldn't unknow. Thinking about Mara sitting in that room for 7 years, carrying the name of the person who had put her there, choosing silence because speaking meant death. Thinking about how many people had walked past Mara's case and seen only what they were supposed to see. She thought about the way Mara had said, I don't want anything to happen to you. Not because it was her job to say it, not because it was expected, but because she meant it. And Nora had spent years telling herself she was good at not getting attached, and she had been wrong. She contacted a journalist, not through her work email, not through her phone, but she drove to a library to towns over and used a public computer to reach out to a reporter named Sam Ellery, who had covered the original fraud investigation before it was dropped, and she explained what she had found, sent copies of the public records, the financial disclosures, all the connections she had mapped out without mentioning Mara's name or Sylvia Crane's, not yet. Sam Ellery responded within 12 hours. I've been waiting for someone to connect these dots for 3 years. Tell me everything. The next session with Mara was different. The air in the room felt heavier somehow. And Mara noticed immediately because she always noticed, and she said, you did something. I contacted a journalist, Nora said. Someone who already knows pieces of the story. Mara stared at her. I didn't give them your name, Nora added quickly, or Sylvia Crane's, not yet. I needed to know there was someone on the outside who could protect the information. Before I went further, Mara's expression was unreadable for a long moment. Then something moved through it that looked almost like relief, and almost like fear at the same time, and she said, you're really doing this? Yes. Why? Because you've been in here for 7 years for something you didn't do, Nora said. Because you've been silent for 7 years trying to keep yourself alive. Because somebody should have done this a long time ago. Mara looked down at the table. Her hands, always so flat and deliberate, had curled slightly. And she said quietly, you understand that this could go wrong. That the moment Crane's name gets out there, every resource available to people like her is going to come down on whoever put it there. I know. Nora said, and you're doing it anyway, yes? Mara was quiet for a long moment, and when she looked up something in her face had changed. Not the careful guard she had worn for every session, but something beneath that, something tired and real and human, and she said, nobody has ever done anything like this for me. Her voice flat, not dramatic, just honest, in my entire life. Nora felt the tightness in her chest that she had been carrying for weeks, and finally understood what it was, but she didn't say it out loud. Because this wasn't the place and these weren't the circumstances, and there were rules she had already bent too far. So she just looked at Mara, and hoped that something in her face said what she couldn't. And Mara looked back at her and somehow she seemed to understand. The story broke on a Thursday, and Sam Ellery had worked fast and worked carefully. The piece running with documentation, financial records, timeline comparisons. A source described only as a former associate of Derek Hale who had direct knowledge of the fraud operation. And Sylvia Crane was named and the 2 detectives were named. And the dropped investigation was laid out in detail that made the original decision to close it look exactly like what it was. By Friday morning, Crane had lawyered up. By Friday afternoon, Councilman Reyes had issued a statement expressing full cooperation with any investigation. And by Saturday, one of the detectives had retained separate counsel, and Nora sat at her kitchen table watching the news on her laptop with her coffee going cold beside her, and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, like the walls had moved. The internal review at Harlow started the following week, and Nora was placed on administrative leave while the facility investigated whether she had violated professional conduct standards, and she had known it was coming and had prepared herself for it. But what she hadn't fully prepared for was how quiet everything felt without the work, without those Tuesday sessions, without sitting across from Mara in that small room and feeling, despite everything, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She heard from Sam Ellery that Mara's case had been flagged for review by the state attorneys, office that a pro bono legal team had reached out, that things were moving, and she held onto that. It took for months of legal proceedings and evidence review, of depositions and hearings and documents filed and refiled, and Nora followed every step from the outside, reading everything that was made public, sitting with the uncertainty like a weight she had learned to carry, until one cold Tuesday morning she got a call from Sam Ellery. "She's out," Sam said, "conviction overturned, released this morning." Nora sat down on her kitchen floor and didn't move for a while. They met at a coffee shop 3 weeks later, and Nora got there early because she always did. Sitting at a table by the window watching the door, feeling something she couldn't quite name building in her chest, and then Mara walked in wearing a gray coat with no badge and no number, looking exactly like herself, just free, and she spotted Nora immediately, and crossed the room without hesitating. She sat down, and for a moment neither of them said anything, until Nora said, "You look different." "I'm not wearing the same clothes every day," Mara said. "It makes a significant difference." Nora laughed, and it startled her, and it seemed to startle Mara too. They ordered coffee and they talked, not about the case, not about Crane or Reyes or any of it, but about small things first, what Mara had done in the 3 weeks since her release, where she was staying, what she had eaten for dinner the night before. Like a person who could choose, and then Mara set her cup down and looked at Nora directly. "I thought about you," Mara said, "the whole time, every hearing, every delay. I thought about you sitting somewhere on the outside not knowing. And I thought about how that must have felt. And I thought about what I would say to you when this was over." "What did you come up with?" Nora asked, her voice steady, her hands not. "That you are the most reckless, unreasonable, rule-breaking person I have ever met," Mara said. "And that I have no idea what my life looks like from here. But wherever it goes, I would like you to be part of it, if that's something you want." Nora looked at her for a long moment, thinking about a woman with her hands flat on a table teaching herself not to want things. Thinking about 7 years of silence carried alone. Thinking about the way Mara had said, "I don't want anything to happen to you," like it cost her something. "It's something I want," Nora said. Mara exhaled slowly, like she had been holding it in for a long time. And outside the window the street was ordinary and busy and full of people going places. And the light came through the glass, and landed on the table between them, warm and unhurried, and for the first time in a long time, neither of them was watching the door.